None of us are getting any younger, except maybe Owen Jones. What's up with that? And with birth rates falling for decades and people generally living longer, the complexion of society has changed. In 1980, the average age in the UK was 33. Today, it's almost 41. And while average life expectancy has stagnated in recent years, most people can expect to reach 81 years of age. This all means that people can and do work for longer. And according to new research, the number of people over 70 who are still in work has almost reached 500,000. That's an astonishing 61% increase in just a decade. Now, that's all very interesting, you might think, and it's concerning that the number of older workers is rocketing despite the fact life expectancy hasn't moved for a decade, because what that means is retirement is getting shorter for many. The research was conducted by Rest Less, a digital platform offering advice to older workers. But one aspect of the reporting of this story was the strangest part of all. A Sky News piece appeared with this headline: Big rise in number of over 70s in the workplace, with the king leading by example. A few things here. Firstly, Charles Windsor, who is 74, is younger than the last person to hold his job, Elizabeth Windsor, who was the monarch until last year when she passed away at the age of 96. Secondly, the article describes Charles as, quote, a prime example of the post-state pension age worker. But being the king isn't a job. He wasn't hired, his contract can't be terminated, and other candidates certainly weren't overlooked. He has the role he does because of who his parents are. And while that might apply to half the people who work at the Times newspaper, that's a little bit different to Colin, age 71, working part-time on the checkout at Wilko. And to be clear, Charles doesn't need a job because his personal wealth stands at around £1.8 billion. That includes assets he inherited from his mother, which weren't subject to inheritance tax. After all, that's for the little people. So while I could be wrong here, I suspect he doesn't need to do much overtime to make ends meet, to keep the heating on at Buckingham Palace. And to top it off, the headline describes Charles as, quote, leading by example, as if working well into your 70s is something to be emulated. The retirement age for a man in the UK is 66. That is meant to be the aspiration, not working until you die. And finally, Charles and the likes of you and me aren't the same. If he's leading by example, how come he gets to wear £5,000 suits and drive supercars while many older people stay in work because they can't afford to pay their bills? Barnaby, this is straight up propaganda, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we should take a lesson from the people of France who have a decent welfare state because whenever governments try to attack it, they get out into the streets and they defend it. The lesson here is that if we want good pay and conditions for most people, we shouldn't look to the pay and conditions of Charles Windsor, except to say, why does he live a life so radically different from us? We now know lots of things about quite how radically different his life is. We know, for example, that he's financially secure because the corrupt charity that he runs, the Prince's Trust, takes money in brown paper bags from Saudi oligarchs and promises them knighthoods in return. He uses, like any mafia boss, he uses his connections to state power in order to deliver profits for him. So he promises when he gets money in brown paper bags that he'll give knighthoods to people. He took $1.2 million from members of the Bin Laden family for his trust. And we know that he then intervenes in political decisions. We have the Black Spider memos from the early 2000s where Charles lobbied governments. He's just an ignorant guy who supports things like state funding for unproved homeopathy therapies. But he's able to use his position of family power and privilege to lobby politicians to ensure that our taxpayer money has to go on those things that are his pet projects, whether it's untested health therapies or supporting old-fashioned architecture. For his coronation, we're going to be asked to spend £100 million of taxpayer money. And in addition to that, more than £300 million for a fancy refurbishment of his palaces. We're being asked to shell out all that money while the state hands more and more money to Charles and his family. In 2011, it was £8 million given per year by the state to fund the royal family. Now it's over £86 million. So we've had governments consistently act to help this family to ensure that they can live a life of enormous wealth and privilege, greater even than other royal families in other countries. Consistently, governments have acted to ensure that and to protect them from all scrutiny. Andrew used secretive shell companies to hide money that he was making while going overseas as a trade envoy. If anyone else goes overseas for the British state, there are some transparency requirements so that they can't meet a businessman in Azerbaijan and then ask him to invest in their personal company. Andrew had a whole secret system set up to allow him to do that. You might ask how the kind of impunity allowed him to hang out with child sex traffickers and be complicit in that. Well, it's a whole culture of impunity for members of the British ruling class. If you're on universal credit, you're investigated and inspected to see if you can walk across the room before you're given your benefits. But if you're a member of the royal family, you'll have millions of pounds shoveled to you by hardworking British taxpayers in order to maintain you in a life of luxury. Why was Andrew able to have those shell companies? Because a deal made in the 70s by a Labour government, by the way, allowed the royal family to hide their investments, a special deal. So the British state acts to protect these people, ensure that they can hide their money, have enormous amounts of money, and then have it funded by the taxpayer. That's not the experience of most people when they age. The experience of most people when they age is struggling to work out how to keep paying their bills and being forced into real jobs in order to do that. The royal family live a totally different life, protected and subsidized by the taxpayer. And I think it's time we ended it.
All of us talk to the television sometimes. I know I do. My wife says it's like I'm a different person when I'm watching football, and apparently I'm known to use rather colourful language. Similar things reportedly happen whenever I watch BBC Question Time. Of course, I couldn't possibly comment. But now we're actually being asked to talk to the television as part of the coronation for Charles III. The Observer reports this. Members of the public watching the coronation on television, online and in parks and pubs will be invited to swear aloud their allegiance to the monarch in a chorus of millions of voices to be known as the homage of the people. People around the UK and abroad will be invited to say the words, "I swear that I will pay true allegiance to your majesty and to your heirs and successors according to law, so help me God," in a declaration that replaces the traditional homage of peers. But Charles has talked about modernising the monarchy, and this is apparently what that looks like. After all, the homage of the peers has been a constant of coronations for centuries. At previous coronations, dukes and various members of the aristocracy were expected to pay homage to the monarch and pledge their allegiance to the sovereign, presumably so they wouldn't try and launch a coup or side with an invading foreign power. But today, such things are more likely to be a problem for a character in an HBO series than a consideration for the royals. So this has been updated by Charles to become a homage of the people, talking at your TV screen to you and me. Describing this momentous occasion, a Lambeth Palace spokesperson said this: "Those watching and listening at home and elsewhere will be invited to make their homage by sharing in the same words, a chorus of millions of voices enabled in the first time in history to participate in this solemn and joyful moment." Solemn and joyful, that's rather a bit of a paradox there, but we'll leave that to Lambeth Palace. So what will this actually look like? Well, the Archbishop of Canterbury will be leading the ceremony, and he will call upon, quote, "all persons of goodwill in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and all the other realms and territories to make their homage in heart and voice to their undoubted king, defender of all." The order of service will read as thus: "All who so desire in the Abbey and elsewhere say together, 'I swear that I will pay true allegiance to your majesty and to your heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.'" But that's not all, because it will be followed by this: the playing of a fanfare where the Archbishop will proclaim "God save the King," with all asked to respond, "God save King Charles, long live King Charles, may the King live forever." May the King live forever. Has this country turned into Disneyland? Because I hate to disappoint you, Justin Welby, King Charles isn't going to live forever. Nobody does. We all die. After all, he's just a man, not a god, which kind of makes me think this whole thing is rather sacrilegious. But look, I'm a Catholic, so it's not really my problem. Barnaby, how do you feel about being asked to talk to your TV and asking that Mr. Charles Windsor lives forever?
This stuff matters because the cultures of deference that are built into British society matter. The reason they care, the reason that when Charles was about to be crowned, they went into overdrive to attack and shut down protest in order to make it look like the whole transition was seamless, is because they know that making people believe that we're all inferior to those born with blue blood is one of the mechanisms by which class society gets reproduced. You know, I've seen it again and again and again. Smart people from working class backgrounds who are held back by a belief that they are genuinely inferior to those idiots born with a silver spoon in their mouths. It's one of the ways that British hierarchies get sustained, by telling us that we are somehow lesser than this family of corrupt, child abusing and those who cover up child abusers, profiteers who gained millions and millions from slavery and who now respond to that by saying they're going to fund one PhD to look into the slavery money that went into funding their palaces. Here's a different kind of suggestion for a different kind of country. We could take all of the money that the royals have amassed by theft, corruption, slavery, and abuse over centuries, rather than letting them sit there with those big diamonds stolen from colonies around the world. We could take all of that, give much of it back to people all over the world from whom it was stolen, and still have money to spare to fund nurses' pay rises, to fund the schools that are falling apart, the hospitals that we need to build so people don't lie in corridors waiting for operations. We could fund all of that, and Charles could be liberated to retire as all of us want to retire and enjoy a peaceful, stable old age. Or if he needs to make some money, he could get a job in any of the booming sectors that his subjects have to get jobs in. He could find himself working in an Amazon warehouse or could deliver pizzas on Uber. I don't know that he's qualified to do much else. He could live the life of most of us and be liberated from the endless scrutiny and observation that makes his private life into a public charade, a public circus. We could liberate him. We could free the royals to become human beings and not objects of endless paparazzi scrutiny. They could go abroad and deliver pizzas elsewhere if they want to avoid scrutiny. And the rest of us could enjoy the wealth that they have amassed and not waste it on events like coronations. But these events aren't meaningless. They're ways of instituting deference. They're ways of telling British people, you are inferior to those who were born above you, so you should do as you're told, shut up and accept the crap they give you. That's what royalty does. That's why it matters. Even if it didn't cost a penny, it would matter, because it tells us that the world is divided into those who are born superior and those who are born to serve, those who are born to degrade and those who are born to be degraded. That's why some of them end up abusing kids, because the whole culture of the institution says that only some people matter and other people don't. That some people are there to be pampered with servants fulfilling their every whim, and other people are just there to be abused. That's not the kind of country I want to live in, and that's why I think we need to get rid of them, to save them from their life of miserable family drama, and to save all of us from the culture of deference.